And I remember Neil Gaiman did like this really awesome like speech at a college or something like that, where it's called like the mountain speech, where he's like, hey, there's your mountain. Choose what that thing is, and then just kind of march towards that thing. And if you have to walk sideways, if you have to walk backwards, just always try and go a little bit closer to it as you're progressing through things. I remember I was like, oh, I need my mountain to be like a little more. It can't be, I want to work at Bungie making the next Halo game. You know, that was kind of my first, like, that's what I want to do. Yeah. And I was like, all right, what's a more broad thing that, like, whatever, you got to kind of like introspect. It's like, I really just want to be creative. I want to make a living so I can like create and like have a family, you know? And like, once I let that kind of be my thing, I was like, all right, what's kind of creative? What's kind of fun? Oh, here's a movie studio. Like, that's cool. Like,
Hey guys, in this video I sat down with Sean Ramsey. Sean is Proko's primary video editor and has been working with Stan for almost 10 years helping build his company. In this video we talk about his roundabout path to working for a YouTuber and how he keeps his job interesting. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Just a heads up, by the way, a bunch of planes were flying over us when we were recording, so the audio is kind of crummy at certain points. Sorry about that. I hope that doesn't interfere too much with your enjoyment of the episode.
So we are recording already.
Nice.
Thanks for doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm happy to do it.
So the way I start these things, the point of this thing is not to talk about how to become an artist or like how to draw or how to get a job or any of that kind of stuff. It's more about the why of doing it. You know? Yeah. And like a bit about your background. Like, so you've been working with Stan Proko for the past, 8
years.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And as like Stan's full-time editor. And I think a lot of people overthink the idea of making content or finishing a project. And I think it's been really cool and inspiring watching you find like an alternative creative path and like the traditional stuff that people normally do.
Yeah, it's not when you're in art school or whatever, you don't think, like I definitely didn't think like YouTube editor was gonna be a thing, or general like making cool stuff. Like you kind of expect to kind of be part of a corporate or some larger,
a giant entity.
Yeah, some larger entity that pays you. And like, I'm paid by Proko, but it's like, it's a much smaller crew, and it will work with larger corporate entities, and you kind of see like how all creative stuff goes through this churn. Whereas with Stan and at Proko, like we're just like, hey, I have a cool idea for something. Oh, that's cool. Let's try it. Oh, we did it.
Right.
It's either cool or it's not cool. And then that
means either way, you move on to the next thing. Yeah. I feel like part of the reason I was so attracted to like working with you guys at Proko is initially was just like the ease of doing projects, where when I was like, approaching or trying to work for bigger companies or doing all that kind of stuff, there's way more red tape around doing stuff.
Yes.
And I think like a lot of people just want to figure out how to keep what they like, their creativity sustainable, Yeah. And a lot of people do think that like the only way I'd ever be able to have a job is by selling my soul to Disney or something, and I guess it's cool that like the day-to-day of Proko is a lot of it is just like, let's try out an idea. Let's like, I'll sit down behind the camera with an artist and do a sketchbook tour. And then that blows up. And then, I think the act of starting and doing something and committing to it is a lot more simple it's a lot simpler than people make it out to be.
Yeah. Because we're like focusing on videos and things like that are 10 minutes or something, like 10 to 20 minutes. Sometimes they can get huge, but it's like a self-contained project.
Yeah.
You're working on it. Usually it's like a month to produce a thing, but usually like you're going hardcore on it for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And you finish it, it goes out, you get to see people's reaction if they like it or don't like it. And then you kind of, if you have the time, hopefully you can kind of analyze your videos like, oh, why did this do well? Or why did this not do well? You can look at stuff,
Yeah. Well, and I think the beauty of that is like, I know like for Diablo 3, like Diablo 3 was in development for 10 years. And there are people that started their career on Diablo 3. And then 10 years later, when they're like a veteran game artist, the only project they've ever worked on is Diablo 3.
Yeah.
And I think the beauty of doing these sorts of like businesses, like on your own, like just making content online, there is that like direct feedback loop of like, oh, these people didn't like these videos. I could improve this on it. Oh, I did this, and now it's doing a lot better.
Yeah.
And I think the way people make that sustainable has a lot more to do with like, like having a team of people around you and like making the business, making sure that stuff is all handled, like all the boring, tedious stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not like working for making YouTube videos or working on educational art content or stuff like that. It's not, your time split is not like I'm being creative all the time. Sometimes like you're breaking up your work into a bunch of different chunks. Sometimes I'm just looking for assets to put in a video. Sometimes I'm like trying to understand the content better to make, kind of teach it better through editing. But you're not in like top creative peak at all times. Right. There's kind of like every
ebbs and flows.
Everything has like your higher levels or your lower levels.
Right. Well, and I mean, for anyone watching that has seen Proko videos, like you've edited most of the really popular, or been involved in.
I've been involved in a lot. I'm trying to think of how many we have released, like hundreds. When I think of like, wow, have I really done this? I'll like scroll back into the timeline because I got hired. I joined the team when it was like we would start early anatomy course, which is like a long time ago. Yeah. And I just kind of had a hand in all that. And then as we like could figure out some stuff, we were like, oh, maybe we can get help in this other way and like bring more people or whenever we could. Yeah. And you just kind of see what other people can bring to it. And sometimes you just say like, hey, here's a cool thing. Usually if we have an idea, we like kind of give a general request. Yeah. And the first thing that comes to mind is like Cody Shank, who does all the cartoon related things with us. We just say, hey, here's our idea. Here's the audio. Can you make a fun cartoon out of this? And usually something comes back and you're just like, oh my God, I didn't think of this at all, but it's amazing. This was not my vision, but I love it.
Yeah. Hey guys, I wanted to take a second to talk about the mentorships I have on Patreon. In the mentorships, you'll get 1 or 2 calls a month, depending on what tier you sign up for, written critiques and draw-overs, and general art advice. Mentorship is something that I found personally really useful, and it saved me a lot of trial and error trying to figure out things on my own. If you're curious about it and want to test it out, I'm doing 20-minute free calls for anyone that might be interested. Just go ahead and reach out to me on my website and we can set something up. Thanks, and back to the video.
Well, and I think the beauty of that is like, again, I think a lot of people think that in order to do highly creative work, like doing exactly what they want to do, they have to be working for one of the big companies. Yeah. I think a lot of people don't think that they could build the system on their own to enable them to, spend a month on a YouTube video and really make it the best they can. Yeah. I think part of the, cool thing about starting a YouTube channel in this way is that, like, because you are able to have a team and have more people working on it, you make the projects better, which in turn gets more views, which allows you to, like hire more people eventually and stuff. Yeah. And like it becomes like almost like a snowball self-sustaining business in some sense.
Yeah. Once you're good enough to make something like that people want to consume, I will say, like, before working with Stan, I did work at like a large visual effects studio doing stereoscopic 3D stuff. And while that wasn't like, I wasn't like super creatively fulfilled, it was still like fun. And even though I was like a bottom level grunt, where you still got to work on movies, and it kind of got you into production sense, like, or in a production workflow. Yeah. Because like every shot you worked on was timed. You'd literally like press a button and a clock would start counting down, and you have a certain amount of time to finish that shot. Yeah. And just having like, it was very like
by clock
grindy. And I think having that, I knew going into it, like, I was like, this is not what I want my life to look like, but it's you can say you worked on Spider-Man. Yeah. That's great for the next thing. Right. I think that helped when, I sent my resume to Stan. I was like, hey, I watch your videos. Like, I worked on these movies and here's my resume, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then it kind of got a call and then got to.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think a lot of people don't really know where they're going to land, and I think everyone I've ever talked to that's had a job in the creative field, it's been a lot of trial and error and a lot of experimentation. Like you working at that company, you never would have expected, again, YouTube editor would be.
Yeah. I didn't think that was the next jump. I was thinking like grad school. Like my next thing was I actually went into teaching.
Yeah.
Because I was like, well, I should get some teaching experience and then maybe do grad school.
Right.
And then while I was applying to grad school was when I was just browsing Craigslist because I was getting pretty burned out on teaching because that's like the most exhausting thing I've ever done, like work-wise. And I just was like, hey, here's a YouTuber I watch.
Yeah.
And he's in San Diego and he lives by me. Like, let me
try it out.
Let me call him up.
Yeah.
It was very casual.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. Well, and I think people overthink a lot of these things. Like, these videos that people really care about, they were helped by a Craigslist ad, essentially.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't really know what goes into making a popular piece of content. Like, I mean, you see how some YouTube videos do better than others, how somebody could get 10, 20 million views or a million views or 100,000 views or whatever, and some get 1,000 views. And there's like an obvious disparity there, And I think that like the way somebody grinds and gets an audience online is they like have a special edge. And for,
Yeah, I do feel like you kind of have to have a thing that sets you apart a little bit. And like or have some kind of a thing that can hook people. Like I'll watch a lot of YouTubers that like, I mostly just am really into, I like the educational content or like video essays. I'm just devour those on my free time.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times the ones that I notice I'm gravitating towards versus like, I don't really care for that. It's like they have a little bit more of a unique voice or just they think of a thing in a way that I find interesting. I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's tough when there's like literally like a million videos coming out every day.
Well, I guess, again, the cool part about all this stuff, like I think the people that I know that I respect the most are people that like are able to make something that they really care about resonates with a ton of people, and that generally comes from just being honest with yourself with what you like most. Like I'm sure a lot of the videos that you've watched have made a huge influence on Proko videos.
Yes, very much. So I'll see a thing that I like from a video, an essay, and I'll be like, oh, how did they do that? Like, that's cool. Yeah. And then I'll bring it back. Or I'll just go into a rabbit hole. I watch editor YouTube as well. There's just editors who show off their thing because I'm like, oh, this is cool. Yeah. And you can kind of have it going when you have like most of my tasks are kind of a little too high level that I don't want audio, like speaking happening. But when I can get a task that I can kind of combo the two things, I'll like have a editor YouTube on, just like seeing what their process is like or their theory.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other part of this as well is like a lot of your job is actually kind of tedious as well. It's not like I have talked to a lot of people before, but like doing work that's seen by a lot of people and work that's not seen by a lot of people requires a lot of the same tasks, like organizing footage, transferring footage, naming files, all this stuff. And I think that somebody's ability to do that sort of thing, like the managing a business, all this stuff. I think that's actually a huge reason why somebody is successful in the first place. Yeah,
there's like a how well can you power through stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I think stamina or whatever, just being able to find a way to, even if a part is boring or whatever, because usually the first part of clipping and editing and things like that can be pretty boring because you're just watching like, is this good? You just kind of A/B. Is this good or bad? Yeah. On, off. And if that footage is 12 hours, like that's rough. Yeah. Thankfully, I'm at a point where usually we have like we have other editors working on stuff. Yeah. And then I get a more refined cut, and then I can like pitch my ideas in or things like that. But there's still a lot, there's always stuff. No matter what your job is, you're going to be like reading a script and like, this is boring right now. How do I make it better? Yeah. Usually it's like the struggle parts are when you run into a problem that you're just not sure how to solve. And then you're just like, oh, how do I make this good? Because it's not good right now. Yeah.
Well, when you run into a video that you feel is not good, or you feel like a problem that you can't solve, like, what do you usually do about that?
Usually I cut stuff until it's good. I'm like, this is boring. What is it like when it's not like that? And we're kind of combining things because we're teaching and we're trying to keep it entertaining. So for YouTube is different from like our website. Website, we can go a lot, like teaching is more valuable on our website. We still want to keep it entertaining because that's like the whole point of our channel and stuff. We want to teach stuff in a fun manner, but on YouTube you're a little more corralled by the algorithm, just because that's like what they kind of like, the algorithm or YouTube or whatever platform you're on kind of pushes stuff based on if it's people are clicking away or not. And so usually for YouTube, I'm just like, does it have to be there? And I feel like one thing that I found, I felt like I became a better editor after I wrote a lot. Like I did a lot of writing. A few years ago, I was like, I listened to a lot of Brandon Sanderson writing podcasts and things like that. I was like, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to write. I'm going to edit my own, edit my text. And that makes you really have to think about like, is this sentence important? Is this word important? Right. Or should it go? I feel like I was a lot more heavy-handed. I was just more decisive at cutting things out after I did this not totally unrelated thing, but it's like still creative, but not that related to video editing.
Yeah, right. Well, I feel like a lot of people might be surprised by how simple making a video is too, in terms of like, you do get 12 hours of footage and you're spending your time like looking through someone else's set of words that they're saying and trying to craft a story out of that. And I know like tons of videos that we, when I was working with Proko, that was put together, that was like 20 hours of footage and then just like cut to the interesting bits, the stuff that makes it cool, and then cut out everything else.
That's rough. Like I think that in every creative process there's that like system of like, you wade through the bad stuff until you get to the good stuff, and once you've gone through the stages of, okay, this is bad, this is not great right now, but I know that in the past I've gone through this process and I've gotten to the end product that like I'm happy with. Like if you do that enough times, like early on I would be working on something and I'd be like, oh, this is bad, like we can't make it work. This is so tough. But like that was when I was starting that work, and then Stan would come in and be like, no, we can do this and this and this, and you're like, oh yeah, cool, like this, and then you see the finished product at the end, and so you can kind of power through the bad to make it good. You just keep refining.
Well, I would say your job more so than anything is not necessarily editing. It's just like being like a taste maker, or being like a decision maker in terms of what you're trying to tell the story of, like filtering stuff, and it's
just always like, even if I'm editing something from scratch, I want to send it to somebody else. Like right now I'm the person that a lot of people, they'll send me their videos and then I will review that and then give them my thoughts. But if I edit, I don't just say like, green light, I did it. I want someone else's eyes on it, because you're too deep into a piece. Like having someone else reviewing your work or having someone else like giving their thoughts on it is, I think, really important. Because you're so deep into it, and by the time like it goes out, you're like, this is done. You've spent like 50 to 100 hours on something. And then you have
no idea if it's good.
And your brain is so deep in that land, like unless you like put it down and then come back to it a couple weeks later, everything in there by that point is like a darling to you, and you're like, oh, I can't cut that. That took me an hour to do, or that kind of stuff. And having someone else look at it who is not attached to anything, and they can just be like, no, it's not funny. No, we shouldn't do that. Like it's painful. But
well, I think from another, I think detaching yourself from the outcome is super important as well. Like I'm sure you've worked on videos that have done way worse than you thought they would have, based on the time investment. And it's like, and on the flip side, other videos that you worked on that have gotten like
blew up.
Like an hour on.
Short things.
Massive,
Yeah, it's usually more like I have a gag in mind. I'm like, oh, this would be really funny.
Yeah.
People are gonna be commenting like, oh, there's Trogdor. There's a thing, and I'll like draw a little thing, add it in there, and then like no one cares. Yeah. It might be a thing that someone might smile, but they're not gonna post a comment. Yeah. And you're just like, I spent all that time, but at least you're like, I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think the more you're able to just like fall in love with the process of it and be in like a mindset of just creating stuff and trying stuff out, that's the way you make it sustainable. Like whether it's the video that gets 10 million views or the one that, gets 20,000 or less, it's like both outcomes are okay.
Yeah.
As long as you got to do the thing,
Yeah. There was, when I was in college, I initially wanted to go into like game design, game making, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I remember kind of reading the news. I was very deep into like reading up on like the gaming industry and stuff like that, and just kind of feeling sad about like how they treat their artists and their programmers and what that was like. Yeah. And I remember Neil Gaiman did like this really awesome like speech at a college or something like that, where it's called like the mountain speech, where he's like, hey, there's your mountain, choose what that thing is, and then just kind of march towards that thing. And if you have to walk sideways, if you have to walk backwards, just always try and go a little bit closer to it as you're progressing through things. I remember I was like, I need my mountain to be like a little more, it can't be, I want to work at Bungie making the next Halo game. Right. That was kind of my first, like, that's what I want to do. Yeah. That's a little too specific. Yeah. And I was like, all right, what's a more broad thing that like, whatever, you got to kind of like introspect. It's like, I really just want to be creative. I want to make a living so I can like create and like have a family, you know? And like, once I let that kind of be my thing, I was like, all right, what's kind of creative? What's kind of fun? Oh, here's a movie studio. Yeah. Like, that's cool. Like, I want to work on that. I got the skills to do that. Like, let me kind of do that. And like, I felt like I was moving forward. And I was like, all right, I'm kind of done with this. Yeah. What's my next thing? Oh, art. I'll doing comics. Like, I was doing web comics and stuff like that, just to kind of like make my skills better. Yeah, yeah. And
just trying stuff out.
Yeah, and that didn't lead to any financial like comings up, or it didn't have a huge following or anything, but I had like this history of stuff I made that when it came time to like, hey Stan, hey, I work on these movies. Oh, I also do art. Here's this comic I make. I do web design. I designed the whole website for it. And I like just had all these skills like ready to go. Yeah. That was like, oh, here's a jack of all trades that like has handled a lot of everything. I wasn't like as great of an artist. I wasn't as great of a video maker. Like, my visual effects stuff didn't really like come into play for here, but I was able to at least like learn that kind of stuff. Yeah. While like kind of pick it up. Like, oh, what's important? Just if you can learn stuff quickly, like whenever I've been hiring people, it's always like, ooh, how quickly are they going to learn stuff? Because we do things pretty differently than other people. Yeah. And what do they bring on the table? What are they interested in the content? Because a person who's an artist who's going to join the team, like pretty much all of our editors are artists who are into making stuff, and they all can put themselves into it. I think that's really cool. And that's what I felt like was good when I joined. I was like, oh, I really like this stuff. Yeah. And so you can put yourself into it.
Well, I think it goes back to the idea of the why thing as well, because it's like, if you don't know what you want, it's hard to really go in a direction. Yeah. It's impossible, actually. Yeah. And you deciding like, oh, I'd like to have a family. I'd like to, be stable financially, all this stuff. It gives you a framework to work from. I want to take on this amount of risk and not this amount of risk, or whatever. And knowing yourself, knowing who you are and what your sensibilities are, like like a lot of people might overshoot and be like, I'm going to be the next director of the next biggest movie, which is impossible. Like no one can, like a couple people do that, right?
It's like, I'm going to be the next LeBron.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a great thing to shoot for.
Yeah,
but like, what's the broad stroke that you're looking? You want to play basketball? Like you can probably, you know.
And like, what can you actually do?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, if you want to be LeBron James, a lot of your job is like dribbling, you know, a lot of it is just like practicing the same things over and over again. And if you're not okay with that, then you're not going to be LeBron James. And that's okay. But, you know, I think that where most people get caught up in is like not understanding what they truly want. And then I think in art education, especially, you're pulled in so many directions that it's really easy to, you know, jump from one school to another and kind of get stuck in a perpetual like, oh, I'm training, you know, I'm a student, you know?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of school stuff also will, like, they kind of railroad you down, like, a specific path. And I remember feeling that a lot in college because I didn't start as majoring in art. I was a history major for, like, 3 years. And then I was like, I don't actually want a job in history. I just like it as a subject, you know? And I went to like a Comic-Con panel and it was just like, how do you get in the gaming industry? You're either a programmer or you're an artist.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'll try some art classes. I'll try some programming classes. And I did not like the programming classes. I liked the art classes a lot more. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to do this. Like, I'm going to change my major to this. I was fortunate in that like I was able to like stay at home. Like I lived with my parents. I didn't feel awesome, but I was like, I'm paying no money for rent.
Yeah.
I was working at like a store and on the weekends. And then because I was going to a state school, I was able to pay for my own college from like working at a store, you know, just saving my money and living at my parents' basement. So my risks was a lot lower. Like if I had a kid, that'd be a lot harder. Yeah. You know, like right now I'm like, I value stability. I have a kid. That's
kid and family.
The kid is a higher priority. But in, you know, when I was younger, it was like,
well, I think like, you know, obviously not everyone can do that.
Yeah.
Right? But
it's mega privileged to be able to like go to college and live with your family and they're not bugging you. They're not like going nuts on you.
Yeah, one, I don't think there's necessarily any shame in it either, you know. I think like Stan started Proko when he was like 26, and before that he was living with his parents the whole time. And
he was living with his parents until literally like right before I was hired. He like got his house. Yeah, I was like, hey, this is my place. We're still moving in. Yeah. So.
One, I think like letting go of your ego a little bit, or like, you know, keeping your eye on your goals and what you want versus like being caught up with like, oh, I'm a loser because of this, you know?
Yeah.
And it could be like, you know, whether it's like living with your parents or you're at a job you don't like, or you're, you know, at a school you don't like whatever, it could be anything. I think a lot, like there is a trap where people feel like they are behind or they're not doing enough or they just aren't enough. So I think in those sorts of environments, the difficulty isn't like paying the bills and keeping it sustainable. It's like having enough faith in yourself and loving yourself enough and not like, you know, talking yourself into being a loser. Yeah. Essentially, you know?
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with my dad. We were like eating Rubios and I was talking to him about like, I kind of want to change my major. Like I'm a history major. I've never done art. Yeah. Like, but I think I'd rather do that than do, you know, work at a museum or teach kids history. He was like, oh, you're living at home? Yeah. Your costs aren't high. Like, you can go to school. You want to graduate in 6 years? Yeah, do that. And like, you can change, because it was like going to add years to my college as well by changing like at the last minute. Yeah. And, he's like, what? Like, just do it. Well, there's not like, for me, there was like the failure state was I'm at home. Now I have an art degree instead of a history degree. Yeah. And even then I still like, because I went into art, like I also had a musical background and the art people were like, oh, you should go into this music class and, you know, music recording, music composition. And that was like life changing and like changed my outlook on everything. Yeah. Because it was just such an awesome program. So like the combo I don't know. It was definitely worth it for me. And then just kind of waiting for opportunities or making stuff, and then
I feel, again, I think that like the sunk cost fallacy is real. You know, where you feel like you've committed so much time to something you don't like, but you have to finish because you're so far along.
Yeah.
Like I don't like, the older I'm getting and the more of the world that I'm seeing, I'm realizing that there is really no, like, the only success and failure state is like the subjective one that you feel, you know, personally.
Yeah.
Like, there are people obviously that get history degrees and they love working at a museum, and that's their whole thing for their whole lives. And it's okay for anybody to transition from one thing to another.
Yeah.
There is like a cost to that and some sacrifice as well. But I think the idea of where I should be, or the active comparison, is the part where people get in a ton of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I was lucky in that my dad he was like, he wasn't a high school dropout, but he graduated high school with like a D average. He was a hippie for a long time. And then like when he was 40 or something, he was like, you know what? I want to go to school, and now I have a passion for like psychology. Yeah. And he like went to school, did a bunch of community college, went to Berkeley, got a master's, and then like he was like, yeah, like I didn't like school, I hated it. And then once I felt that passion within myself, I went to school and have a master's degree. And like his high school counselors were like, "You're trash. We hate you." Yeah, it's like, wow, that's like. So I never had pressure, because he was just always like, I screwed around for 20 years. Like, I don't care. Like, whatever you do. It was very hands off. So,
well, I think he was able to focus so much time on that because he had a reason to. You know, he had like he had the why. Like, I'm going to, I think having context to anything makes it a lot more interesting. Like, again, the day-to-day, where we're by an airport.
Right now,
so the day-to-day of any job, the day-to-day of like even like playing a video game or anything, it gets pretty tedious. It's just like the context to doing it is the reason you do it in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think anyone really wants to get into like data entry, but or being an accountant. But if you have a reason to, and it's awesome and it's cool to you, then you're going to be like the best accountant in the world.
I know people that are like, this is really cool. I can do this thing. Yeah. Like, there's a thing for everybody. You know, whatever your type is, your work type or brain type. Yeah. Like, there's a thing out there for you, likely.
Well, and I think the other part of it as well is that there really is no set. It's both terrifying and amazing, because there is no set rules to being like finding what you want to do with your life. You know, it's like like school and the education system, I think, will push the idea that like, oh, you have to go to college and get a degree, and that's the way you find security and a life. But that's not true at all. You know? And the beauty of it not being true is you could do whatever you want. You know, like I was talking to a friend earlier, like at another podcast, and he draws anime boys for a living, for fan art, and he makes a good living drawing anime boys, and it's like, that's great.
Do it.
Yeah. And again, I think it's like your ability to focus on it is, to me, the most valuable resource. It's not like nepotism or anything. It's like, do you care about it enough? You know.
Yeah, it is kind of like, we'll see people who post like, I really want to be a good artist. Yeah. But I just hate drawing. It's like, ooh, that's tough. Do you want to do that thing? Yeah. Like, I struggle with drawing a lot too. And like I struggled making comics and things like that. But as I was like editing, I was like, oh, this is like a lot more chill. I like that a lot more. Like, I initially thought I was like going into video games. I was like, do I go into comics? And I realized I just like telling stories. I like just that storytelling process, and a video. Yeah. That's something like that. I like educational content. Like, I'm just into that kind of thing. And it's just like, you kind of gotta test things out and see what's interesting to you, that you can actually like put your brain onto it.
Right. And well, I mean, I care about drawing a little bit, but not nearly as much as some other people. You know, like I'm an okay draftsman, but I think it's like, oh, I can find a spot in this like niche, like sphere of art education, and still feel relevant, and still feel like my voice is valid and heard and stuff. And I'm finding it's never about how good you are as a technician or anything. It's about fundamentally what you're saying.
Yeah. For the message, the story, or
Well, and it's like for Proko, it's like all about just making stuff accessible and easy to watch.
Yeah.
You know? I think like I'll see some online schools and even unrelated brag about they have 10,000 hours of content for you to watch, and it's like that's not watchable. You know, no one's going to actually do that. You know, but they use it as like a metric to trick people into getting subscribed because it's a big number.
Yeah, it's tough because it's like you people kind of look at stuff based on metrics, but then like how do you determine the quality? I remember I feel like that's why Proko got big in the first place, was because like back when it started, like everyone else was just like, you see a guy pushing the button on their camera and they got their thing down. They're like, all right, I'm going to talk about this. And they just do it live.
Yeah.
And at that point it was something that like there were not a ton of those people out there. And so just a person drawing and talking about it was like this, oh, here's a cool thing. Like that's awesome.
Yeah.
But then Stan comes along and is like, no, I'm going to tell you how to do that thing and show you how to do it in 3 minutes instead of 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, and it takes 10 times longer to make that 3 minutes than the person who's doing the full thing. And that was how he set himself apart. Maybe if like you're doing it live, you're Kim Jong-gi and you're just like, you're doing it live and it's just the most amazing drawing and you're just amazed by the process. That's what sets him apart.
So. Well, and I feel like the other flip side of that is that there's like always new opportunities for people to thrive in, you know? Like when YouTube was coming out, it was a bad idea to start a YouTube channel when Proko was created, I think. Like, it was just like
he was like I think he started because he was like, I want to promote my blog.
Right.
He had a blog that he wanted.
I think he wanted to sell his paintings as well.
Oh yeah.
It's like, okay, like again, no one would have guessed how that.
It's like, well, nobody bought my paintings, but like, man, people really. I think he even like he just released. He would just like did all this free content, and people were like, I want to buy this on DVD. And he's like, but it's free on YouTube. He's like, no, we want a DVD. He's like, all right, I'll make a DVD, and just people bought it. And he's like, oh, I can make a living off of this. That's cool.
Well, and I think it's like looking at that, and then like the valuable thing. There isn't the skills of like drawing. It's like the optimism to try it out, you know, and the like initiative to actually try and put effort into it and make it good and stuff.
Again,
I feel like people look at every potential outcome and they lean towards the failures and they lean towards the bad outcomes.
I think that it's important to like remember everything it's important to have some kind of a metric for yourself that's not money as well. That's a very important metric if you're like trying to be a professional, but if you're like just learning stuff, like you got to have other metrics. Like when I talk about the comic, I started the comic, my metric, I was like, oh, what are my metrics? What do I want to happen for this? It was really just like I bought a tablet and I needed to learn how to digitally draw. Like I had never digitally drawn, so I'm like, I'm gonna try this out, and like I can go back to the first one and then go to the last one. And there's an extreme increase in quality. Every time I do something, I'm like, I'm going to try this little thing out that I've never done before. And like that would go into my tool belt. And now I use those skills just making things for video. Like all those skills translated, not 100%, but like I use those all the time when I'm making stuff.
Right. Well, and I mean, like, so you spend a lot of your time behind the scenes. Like you never really appear in videos.
I think I've been in a couple, but it's usually I'm
very rare,
either behind the camera or not even in the same room.
Well, and I think that's another interesting thing is like a lot of the people behind a lot of these big, you know, giant seeming things. There's a team of people working on it. You know, and for something like Proko, there's like, you know, a bunch of editors.
There's like a dozen people or more.
Camera operator, you know, and it's like if somebody's aspiring to make content like Proko now, it's like it's there's a lot of work.
There's a
lot of people that go into it.
You know? Just look at the credits on any video. Just go in the description and you can see like how many people were involved. Sometimes it's small. Sometimes we can make a contained little thing that's really short.
Yeah.
But usually there's a lot of hands at work.
Yeah.
And everyone's working to just make it better.
Yeah. Well, and I think for anyone aspiring to make like their own like do their first creative project, you know, like start their first lemonade stand sort of thing, like not even something to make money, just like I'm gonna try and like make a YouTube video and sell a product.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try and make like a game or a graphic novel or any of that kind of stuff. Like everyone, it's kind of weird talking to so many people because everyone gives similar answers of just like, just do it. Like, don't think about it. Don't think about what you're going to get, how much money you're going to make. Don't think about like what it's going to be like when you're famous or not famous or everything that can go wrong. Because when you start thinking of the future, you take yourself out of the moment. And when you do that, the product is worse.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's kind of like making creative content and stuff like that. It's a snowball. And if you can just start that snowball rolling, no matter how small that snowball is, the more stuff you make, the more that snowball will grow.
Yeah.
And maybe if your content's not great, it's not growing very fast. Or if the algorithm doesn't hit you, it's not growing fast. But once I'll pause, I'll pause a minute for airplanes.
Yeah. Sorry, everybody.
No, this is the standard around here. This is what happens when you're near a naval base. But once you start getting like, oh, you make a hit, something big, that snowball will, it'll start jumping.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff, like I'll listen to like writing podcasts of like screenwriters, and they're like, hey, for this thing I wrote, I sold this thing, or I wrote a book, and they released the book. And it has middling success. Yeah. And then they get a little bit of a revenue from that. And then they're like, okay, now I can write the next thing. I'll work on the next thing. And they keep releasing books or video, TV shows or movies or whatever. And that like pile of small incremental, like not revenue, but like the kickbacks from royalties, yeah. The stuff that the writer's strike is happening for, because they're basically like they cut all their royalties over time as you get better and you release more stuff. All those little things have now added up to like a decent thing that you're like, okay, this is now my income that I can hold on to while I'm working on the next thing.
Yeah. Well, I think again for YouTube content, the cool thing about it is like, you know, the lifespan of a video is years, whereas like the lifespan of like a single image or an Instagram post is like a day, right? Yeah. It's like you get one initial spike, and then it's like, it's very rare that content is ever shown to people ever again.
Yeah, but unless you start like releasing on new platforms or something like that, and that's a whole different beast.
Well, and it's like I'll get recommended YouTube content from like 10 years ago from some creator I forgot about. Yeah, you know? It's like, oh shit, like that guy.
Yeah.
You know, I'll go back and like rewatch content as well. And for like any of these channels, it's like you release a video, it doesn't matter how well it does, but all your other videos get more views as a result of like you being like seen as like a consistent poster or something. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. But, yeah, just making stuff.
Yeah.
Make lots of stuff. If you can if that creatively fulfills you, you know, if you're grinding yourself into the ground, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's not the thing you should be working on.
Well, I think it's being aware of what you're actually creating and what the audience is. Because I think that a lot of people think that if they just draw a lot and if they just make a lot of stuff, then they're going to be successful. And there's something a lot deeper than that.
Yeah.
I think it's like thinking about like, okay, like for figure drawing, for example, if somebody's going to become a great figurative artist and they're going to try and make a living off of that, it's going to be really hard to sell just your images, right? Just sell your drawings. It's like almost impossible. Yeah. Because no one hangs up on their walls. It's way more about the process of it and like the lifestyle around it and all that.
Yeah.
And like the context behind the figure drawing and all that stuff is the reason people care about these YouTube videos in the first place. And like thinking about it more broadly in terms of like, if you're going to make a painting, like how many people are actually going to see it? How many people do I need to buy it in order to make a sustainable business to actually keep doing it? And often the answer is like you need like 1 million people to see your drawing in order to like actually have somebody buy it for like $5,000 or $6,000.
Yeah.
Or a very select few people that actually might buy it, you know? And I think there's the ideal of just getting to draw exactly the way you want to draw all the time, but then there's like the compromise of doing it in a way which enables you to keep doing it indefinitely. You know?
Yeah.
Like either teaching or like working on a team or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I feel like it goes back to like aim a little more broad and then see where where you professionally land versus like being so pinpoint specific that everything has to go roll 20s every time to land at that one thing.
I'm curious how this sounds.
Oh yeah,
I doubt it.
Let's see. Is it on figure 8?
Yes, it is.
It is. Well, you got the perfect. That's the exact thing.
Yeah.
But who knows? Airplanes. Yeah. They'll penetrate the figure 8.
Well, and I guess it's like I think it's that ability to focus on the mundane day-to-day stuff, like again editing, like managing files, like thinking of like new ways of adding cool effects and telling the story, but also having the ability to think more broadly in terms of like what kind of people are going to watch the thing that you're trying to create.
Yeah. I think also just like always be learning new stuff too, like, or always approach things. I found myself sometimes like I'd approach things the exact same way.
Yeah.
And you can kind of get into a rut if you're doing that. Like we recently started, like YouTube shorts became a thing that's like really important. And it's like, oh man, I gotta think about these things now. And you gotta the more I go into that stuff, it's like, oh, actually like I should be utilizing the stuff that I make a short with in just a regular video. And it can make like these ways of approaching this new method that we have to kind of think about. Yeah. It's kind of bled into what a longer form video is. Right. But it makes that long form video better, faster paced, more interesting, because shorts are such a you have to hone the like interesting content to such a degree that like that skill set has bled over, even though they seem like the same thing. It's like, oh yeah, make a video that's tall versus a video that's wide. It's like,
there's so many
things but learning that, like, I feel like I've been able to make things better in the long form videos, better for premium students, all that stuff.
Well, I think it's like having the ability to just like feel okay with throwing out what you thought was the way of getting attention before. You know, it's like the Proko logo bug in the beginning.
Yeah.
That's turns out to be like a waste of time. You know? It's like now people's attention spans are shorter, so you want to try and hook people as fast as possible. Whereas like having a 10 or 15 second.
This is my life when recording, even in the studio, and you're like, I got a roof over me too, and
super loud.
Someone's talking about a very important point, and then a blue angel screams overhead.
Well, I think it's like a lot of it is like you see how something works, and then quickly pivoting into the direction that it seems to be going.
Yeah.
And having the like curiosity to do it well and still care about it. I think the danger about starting anything creative is that the taste for what is cool and what isn't cool change so fast that your ability to just like, shift and completely do something completely different and still do it really well.
Yeah. Being comfortable with growing. I think it even goes with like editing, like similar to cutting the content out, that you're like, this was your darling. Maybe this process was your darling. And you're like, this is so cool. But it's like, oh, that's not really working anymore. Like, how do we evolve it? How do I make it better? Yeah. And just being cool with learning. I do think you need some kind of time of reflection afterwards. Like, I think one trap that a person can fall into is always be producing content, but then you release the content, you start producing the next content. And you can do that over and over and over again without any reflection. Sometimes you need a pause and reflect and just look at stuff. Like, I'm a person who makes videos. I'm not a person who looks at the statistics that hard. Like I look at the general statistics, but I don't go like too deep.
Yeah.
But then I started having to I was like, I should actually let me go in and see where people are dropping off.
Yeah.
Where's the spike? Like what are people finding interesting? And just by doing that, and even maybe it wasn't that successful, but just thinking about that kind of way of thinking, that reflection is really important to do, because then it kind of gets, while you're working, you're thinking, you're kind of growing.
Well, I think the world in general, every field is like telling you exactly what to do in a sense. It's just like your willingness to listen to it.
Yeah.
You know? Especially with content too, because it's people that are watching it. You know, and they're clicking off at certain points. So they're like communicating to you, this isn't good, this is bad, this is awesome, you know? And like, you can either ignore that or not, depending on what your tastes and for what you want your life to be like. But I think that a lot of making popular content is
airplanes.
A lot of it seems like it increased a lot in the past 15 minutes.
I saw some heavy duty helicopters flying over the airbase recently. Yeah, like today.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it seemed I forgot.
So making content.
Like getting that information and getting that data and all, and doing something about it, you know, versus just sticking to the status quo of what worked before and continuing to do that. Because I think it's interesting seeing how YouTube has changed from being like you saw a bunch of YouTubers doing the same thing for years, you know, and they didn't change, and now they have 5 or 6 million subscribers, but they get 10,000 views per video, and it's like, what fucking happened there, you know? And it's like, but then you see YouTubers that blow up out of nowhere, where their videos get tons of views with they get tons of views with 0 subscribers, and it's like seemingly out of nowhere, but it's more in line with the kind of content that's popular today.
Yeah. I definitely did not expect it was 7-hour video game retrospectives to explode. And also for me to be interested in that.
And watch the entire
I watched the entire thing. I'm
Joseph Anderson?
Yeah, I'm how each one of these is multiple movies. Yep. But it is an interesting thing where it's I'm not watching it for 7 hours. I have it on while I'm cooking. Yeah. Right? So there's a whole, I don't know. That kind of content's very interesting. The stuff that we make, you kind of need to be watching, unless it's a podcast. You know, podcasts you can listen to. The visuals aren't as important. Yeah. And I feel like that kind of stuff, it's a little more, has an advantage. I'll watch people that are hey, thanks for watching, or just listening. If you're just listening, I'm oh yeah, that's me. I'm just listening while I cook dinner. Yeah. And I'm cooking for half an hour, and I'm having my YouTube time, and I'm having a great time. Yeah.
Well, I feel like passive content has there's the passive content, which I think is podcasts and all that kind of stuff, but then there's the active content, which is turning into TikTok and YouTube Shorts and stuff, you know. Yeah. Where it's I think people will sit down and watch 20-minute videos when they sit down to eat, you know, for lunch or something. Yeah. But it's very rare where somebody will sit down and watch 10 or 15 educational videos in a row or something. You know? Yeah. So it's it just has a more distinct advantage in terms of the audience. And
there's kind of a hybrid. All the video essay people I watch Nerd Writer or Overly Sarcastic Productions, you know, those kinds of people. That they're just talking about a topic that's interesting, or a history thing that's interesting. And that could be active, but it's because it's kind of a hybrid, I watch those only when I'm cooking or eating, you know, or cleaning or something like that. Whereas stuff like Proko, this is an art school. Yeah. You need to be your brain needs to be on it if you want to learn this stuff. Right. And so they're
yeah. Well, I feel going back to the beginning of our conversation, I think it's easy to overthink, unless I'm making a Netflix show, which takes a lot of money and time in order to complete, then I'm not making good content. You can just I do this podcast all by myself, and it doesn't get the reach that a Netflix show would get. but it's still like worth doing for me just because I enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
And it's like a one-man production. It's like what I'm able to do and what I can do versus like what I would do if I had an infinite amount of resources at my disposal.
Yeah, and as you work on stuff, you're like, oh, this isn't working. Let me get another mic. Oh, this isn't working. Let me get a TV in the background. And you're like slowly building up like what works.
Yeah.
And just by making stuff, you're kind of troubleshooting.
But like the core of what I'm trying to say, the core of like the message of it is it's the same even if it was super big or not. It's like talking about like this kind of stuff, like honesty and what you're doing and all that. And I think it's like, again, going back to the why, it's like figuring out exactly what you'd be saying at every level, and then just like expanding it slowly over time to bigger and bigger audiences. Like you starting out with your webcomic and doing stuff for that bigger company led to you having a more creative role on potentially like bigger content. Just like doing that kind of stuff,
just being able to learn stuff, having a bunch of little tools in my belt of like knowing how to make stuff, having the experience of like a production environment, like all those things like separately. At the time, I wasn't necessarily thinking like this will be really useful when I apply for this thing or when I'm gonna work on this other thing. It's just like, oh, I need to learn this thing, and then even like writing, like I didn't think that would be really useful. It was just a thing I was doing for fun on the side, and then after a while, I was like, oh, actually, this really bled into my other stuff. So that mountain of just feeling creative and making creative stuff or telling stories, like I was able to pick up a lot of skills that were fun to learn and just like it was like, oh, now I can make cool stuff even cooler. And
fundamentally it's like the mindset of like you'd be doing the same work, I think, if you had $1 billion or something.
I'd probably be making YouTube videos or something. I just like, oh, what can I do?
It would just be at like a bigger scale,
I mean, I probably wouldn't. It'd probably just be a one-man operation. Really just like once you have enough to sustain yourself. If I had the $1 billion and I wasn't like guilt to try and improve the world, I feel like the first thing I'd do is just like, invest in things that would actually make things better. But if you have a stable income, that you're not worried about financially. Say we're in a post-scarcity society. It's not you have $1 billion. You're in a post-scarcity society, and everyone has a place to live and food to eat. It's like I'd probably be just doing a YouTube thing, making fun videos on whatever topics I'd be interested in.
Cool. We've been going for about 57 minutes and 44 seconds.
Nice.
Do you want to wrap it up there?
Yeah, that sounds good. I think it's good.
Cool. Do you want people to follow you? Or
man, it's so weird. I don't have any socials or anything. I got an Instagram, but it's literally just so I can message artists on Instagram to do collabs. My comic was people who draw stuff. It's defunct now, but you can kind of see where it started and where it ended when I pretty much ended when I started working with Stan. I was like, oh, I'm now creatively fulfilled making videos.
I don't need to do this.
And I'm like, I don't need to do the comics anymore. I'm just going to keep making stuff. So,
well, I'll put whatever links down in the comment. So, thanks, man.
Nice. Thank you. This is fun.
Sick.